As you can see, my topic for tonight is what Job teaches us about Satan. If you want to go ahead and turn over to Job, we'll look at that in a minute. If you're in a hard copy Bible, it's right before Psalms. But let's first lay some groundwork and maybe find some motivation as to why we might want to learn about Satan. It'd be nice just to ignore him, but he does exist, and we need to know how to properly deal with him. There's an ancient Chinese military text that dates to the 5th century BC, and it's entitled The Art of War. And it contains a proverb that is sort of in 3 parts. And it says, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself and not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle." So if you want guaranteed victory, know the enemy and know yourself. If you'll be satisfied with mixed results, win some, lose some, then know yourself, but not the enemy. And if you want to know the agony of defeat every time, know neither the enemy nor yourself. And as we open the Scriptures this afternoon, I think we'll find the same thing. We need to know ourselves, and we need to know the enemy also. 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5. "Examine yourselves as to whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. Do you not know yourselves that Jesus Christ is in you, unless indeed you are disqualified?" So examine yourselves, test yourselves, and there it is, know yourselves. Know yourself and know the enemy. We need to know ourselves, our personal strengths and weaknesses, and we also need to know our enemy, our adversary, the one who is seeking to exploit those weaknesses. And if you haven't guessed already, our enemy, our adversary is Satan. In fact, that's what Satan means the adversary. And he's always looking for an opportunity to attack us. The battle we are engaged in is not physical but spiritual in nature. It's a battle for our hearts and minds, and the victor wins our souls. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 expresses that. "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places." In 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 5, Satan is described as the tempter, and he would like nothing more than for us to give in to sin and to join him. As 1 John 3:8 states, "He who sins is of the devil, for the devil has sinned from the beginning." In 2 Corinthians 4:4, he's referred to as the god of this world, and he's intent on blinding our minds from the truth. And Revelations 12:9 states that Satan deceives the whole world. So we've got to make sure that we're not one of those being deceived. And you can see his activities described over in 1 Peter 5:8. "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour." And we'll see this very thing in the book of Job, when Jehovah asked Satan where he's been. And as we just read, Satan is also referred to as the devil in the Scriptures. And a devil, it means simply an accuser or a slanderer. And Revelation 12:10 describes him as the accuser of our brethren, who accuse them before our God day and night. And we'll see Satan take that exact approach with Job. In John 8:44, he's described as a liar and the father of lies. Well, now let's turn our attention to the book of Job and see what we can learn about Satan, especially from the first two chapters of Job. As for Job himself, he served God, and God allowed him to become very prosperous. And none of this escaped Satan's attention. So let's look in Job and read the first 5 verses there. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil. And 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. Also his possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. Now his sons would go and feast in their houses, each one on his appointed day, and would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So it was, when the days of feasting had run their course, that Job would send and sanctify them. And he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did regularly. Now, starting in verse 6, the scene changes, and we get to peek behind the curtain into the heavenly places. So let's continue reading there with verse 6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." So the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person." Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Well, let's pause there and think about what those verses are telling us about Satan. I came up with 7 things. You may be able to come up with some other ones. But number 1, Satan is accountable to God. Apparently the heavenly host has been called before God to report on their activities there in verse 6. And guess who shows up? Satan. He shows up among them. Satan, however unwilling he may be, is subject to divine authority, just like all other created beings. He's compelled to render account to God, and we'll see this same thing play out again when we get to chapter 2. Another thing to notice is that Satan is behind the evils on the earth. In verse 7, Jehovah asked Satan where he has been. And Satan answered truthfully, "I've been roaming about on the earth." If Jehovah had also asked him, "And what have you been doing while you've been roaming about on the earth?" Well, we already read the answer to that question back in 1 Peter 5:8, right? I've been seeking someone to devour. So that's what he's up to while he's on the earth. The third thing to notice is that God knows the mind of Satan. God did not just pick Job's name out of a hat when he asked Satan in verse 8, "Have you considered my servant Job?" Job already knew that Satan was eager to go after Job. The term there, considered, literally means set your heart on. So you might think of God as saying, "Satan, have you set your heart on devouring my servant Job? I know you have." So while God is all-knowing, Satan is not. Satan is not omniscient. That's the next thing we might notice. Unlike God, Satan cannot see into the mind of man. He thought he knew what was in Job's mind, but he was mistaken. Satan thought Job would curse God if he lost his property, his children, and his health. But Satan, as he so often is, was wrong. Another thing that we can learn about Satan from the book of Job is that Satan cannot act without divine permission. God grants Satan permission to launch an assault on Job in verse 12. There it says, "The Lord said to Satan, 'Behold, all that he has is in your power.'" And we see that same fact that Satan cannot act without divine permission in the New Testament. Luke 22:31, Satan asked permission to go after Peter. And the Lord said, "Simon, Simon, indeed Satan has asked for you, that he may sift you as wheat." And although Satan may be given permission, it's not unlimited permission. When Satan is granted permission, it is limited. We notice that also when we look at verse 12. Because God does say, "Behold, all that Job has is in your power, only do not lay a hand on his person." And Satan, not only is he limited there, but he'll be limited again in chapter 2. We'll see that repeated. And as for you and me, Satan is also limited in what he can do. If we go to the New Testament for a moment, 1 Corinthians 10:13. "No temptation has overtaken you except such as common to man, but God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it." So God will not allow more than what we can handle. He'll not allow us to be tempted beyond what we're able. And as we continue reading here in Job, we'll also notice that Satan does not surrender after his first defeat. So let's see what happens after God places all that Job has into Satan's hands. We left off with verse 12, so let's pick up again in Job chapter 1 with verse 13. And if you notice back at the beginning of the chapter, in verses 2 and 3, when it listed out all of Job's possessions and his sons and daughters, all of those are lost here in these coming verses. And it mentions it very specifically the animals and the sons and the daughters. So, verse 13 of Job chapter 1. "Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And a messenger came to Job and said, 'The oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them. When the Sabaeans raided them and took them away, indeed they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you.' While he was still speaking, another also came and said, 'The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you.' When he was still speaking, another also came and said, 'The Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels and took them away, yes, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you.' While he was still speaking, another also came and said, 'Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And suddenly a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house. And it fell on the young men, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you.' Then Job arose and tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell to the ground and worshipped. And he said, 'Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord.' In all this Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong." So we see there Satan lost that battle. He did not succeed in getting Job to sin. However, Satan has not given up on winning the war. So if we continue in chapter 2, we can see his next attack on Job. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil? And still he holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause." So Satan answered the Lord and said, "Skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face." So the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life." Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took for himself a potsherd from which to scrape himself, while he sat in the midst of the ashes. Then his wife said to him, "Do you still hold to your integrity? Curse God and die." But he said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? In all this Job did not sin with his lips." So there's much more that we can say about the book of Job, but as Job himself, he won the war. At the end of the book, we see that he continued to be a faithful servant of God, and God restored Job's losses and gave him twice as much as he had before. As Job 42 verse 12 states, "The Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning." So in conclusion, to defeat Satan, we must know his ways and understand the threat he poses to us. With God's help, we can be victorious over him. And let us not be ignorant of Satan's schemes against us. Instead, let us be strong in the Lord. And again, we need to know ourselves and we need to know our adversary in order to do that. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10 and 11. "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. And let us also take courage from Job's example of drawing near to God and resisting the devil. As James chapter 4 states, therefore submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you."